Eagles. Eagles.
And a good Thursday morning, everybody. Welcome into another edition of Birds 365. I don't know what day of the year it is, John McMullen, but we are 1 week away from the NFL draft.
1 week away.
So 7 is the number today. Not 365, it's 7 is the day. And the draft is 1 week from today. We're going to touch on that, but holy mackerel, Jalen Hurts arose yesterday. He came from the ashes and spoke, and I have a bite that he said that sits in my head to start this day off. I imagine you were there and probably took it in a lot better. I was on the radio while he was kind of talking yesterday, so I didn't get to watch it in real time. But do you have any initial thoughts on what we saw from one Jalen Hurts yesterday?
Yeah, before I get into Jalen, first of all, I have to say happy Nick Batum Day for everybody. I want to get that out. So it is a week away from the draft, but Nick Batum Day.
Did you hear that? By the way, real quick, you and I used to fight about the process for years. But apparently Maury asked Hinkie to ring the bell and he declined.
I did not hear that. It doesn't surprise me. Sam's a weirdo. Let's be honest. I mean, anybody who writes whether you want to call it a manifesto or a dissertation, if you want to go negative or positive, anybody who does that after they get fired is a lunatic. And I said from that day, never get another job because nobody else wants that.
No,
because executives, coaches, and pro sports, bottom line is you're normally hired to be fired. The great Bum Phillips.
Unless you're Howie Roseman.
Well, even Howie, he gets Howie already lost his job once.
That's true.
And he mentions, look, he's got more. I talk about it on the show all the time. Like he's got more security than any other GM in this league. He doesn't like when that's brought up. Ruben brought that up at his pre-draft press conference, and he balked. And Ruben said, look, we all know Jeffrey respects you, and he said it in a more positive way, and you have a lot of rope and blah, blah, blah. And then how we answered the question. So he does have more rope, but guess what? He doesn't have a lifetime contract. Jeffrey Lurie's over 70 years old. We don't know that relationship between Howie and Julian Lurie. Maybe he's got a right-hand man in mind. So
yeah, that would be the only way I could see something coming to an end for Howie is when Jeffrey leaves. If his son comes in and essentially says, look, I got my own guy.
Exactly.
My dad's guy. That's it. But other than that, I don't think.
No, I don't think Jeffrey's moving on.
No, the Eagles had 3 consecutive seasons, which they've never had in the Lurie era, of under 9 wins, like 3 consecutive 6-win years, maybe.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, if things go negative, anything's on the table. I thought it'd be ludicrous to talk about getting rid of Doug Peterson so soon after the Super Bowl. I remember we were out in Minneapolis. I remember at the bar after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, or maybe it was the day before, the day after, but I was like, Doug Peterson, lifetime dispensation. I said, never have to buy a drink in Philadelphia, all that stuff. He's out the door that quick. So if things go negative for an extended period of time, I mean, you never say never. But all I say about Howie is he's got more job security than any other GM in the NFL.
Yeah.
And that's the most important part of it. And because of that, he can do things that other GMs can't do. And that's fair to point out. It's fair to say.
It's part of the stability.
And it's a big advantage.
Right. It's the part of the stability and, elongated success is that you have one idea that does change throughout, but they stay to what they believe in. And you don't have somebody else coming in and constantly changing the philosophy. It's, hey, this is what we do. Sometimes we're going to hit. Sometimes we're going to miss. But if we stick to what we do, we're going to have stability and long-term success. And that seems to be what has happened here.
Yeah, and that gives you better avenues to success, and more people should copy that and use that type of mindset. Now you got to find the right guy as well. You don't want to sit around for continuity's sake, but and that's the case with Brian Johnson. So sorry I took you on a tangent there, but with Jalen Hurts, you can make a strong argument that, all right, this is a guy he's familiar with. This is a guy that forget about meeting. I think that's overblown because, Brian meeting him at 4 years old or whatever, what is he tapping him on the head and saying, "Hey, nice job, kid." There's not a meaningful relationship being developed there, but they've known each other for a long time, and he recruited him twice in college. But as I often said, even there, you didn't get him, Mike. You didn't get him when he recruited him. So I think a lot of that was overblown to begin with about that relationship. Now, when they got here together, there was tremendous success, and he was the quarterback's coach when Shane was the offensive coordinator, and he turned into the runner-up for the MVP, and I still think he was the best player on the field in Super Bowl 52. He had a tremendous year. And then Shane leaves, and that's what happens when you have success and Brian gets elevated. And, would I have given him another year? Yeah. I mean, they were 8th in offense. They were top, one of the best third down offenses, one of the best fourth down offenses. So you're having success.
I don't know what that says about the
relationally.
league. I don't know what that says about the league in a vacuum, that all offenses, because I would ask this question, and again, I'm not here to say they were awful. I just don't think they came close to expectations, and there was no game, even though the numbers said they weren't awful. Watching them every week, you were just like, what is this? There's not one game that I can just vividly say, man, the offense just clicked in this week. They just looked like they were supposed to. I don't remember one week, maybe the Buffalo game where they put up, they had a good game. I mean, even games like Washington where they ended up getting to 30-plus points, you were like, man, this is still like they just didn't have clean offensive games. So the numbers at the end look good, but I think we could all agree that their offense should have looked and produced more, right?
No, yeah, I think that's fair. And expectations, that's the problem because the expectations were so high. But I mean, there's so much of it we don't know.
So high, though, because of the personnel they have, right? I mean, you got A.J. Brown,
Yeah.
Devontae Smith, Dallas
And
Goedert,
there's
the offensive
nothing.
line, the quarterback who had was the best player in the field in the Super Bowl. You went out and got Swift. I mean, there was reason. A lot of times, John, the Eagle fans can be irrational, and I will call them out when they're irrational. But I will also say when they're not being irrational, to think that offense should have been better, I don't think was an irrational thought.
No, I don't think it was irrational. But then you start, all right, peeling the onion back and saying why. I go all the way back to the preseason when Nick did an interview on Jeff McClain's podcast, and he basically said, and by the way, he said this to me behind the scenes as well. It's not necessarily about doing different things. It's about getting better at what you do. In other words, he came in with that mindset of, hey, we're pretty damn good. We just got to sharpen up what we do and get even better at what we do. And all of a sudden, the rest of the league is looking at the Eagles and saying, how are we going to stop this and making adjustments? And the Eagles are rolling out the footballs and doing exactly what they did the year prior.
Yeah.
And they're trying to make big plays, and everybody from defensively, they're trying to limit those big plays and saying, all right, sort of like Kansas City, if you're going to beat us, you're going to beat us with those small cuts down the field, nothing over the top. And the Eagles seem to fall in love with the big play and trying to push things down the field all the time. And that could be Nick Sirianni. I think it was most notably. That could be Brian. Certainly part of it, but he didn't have the power to do anything about it if he wanted to change it. And then it could be a lot with Jalen Hurts, to be honest, as well. So there's three parts to that equation.
Well, because when I had Britton Covey on at the Super Bowl, he said they were 10-1 and they were winning close games, but teams were getting better and they weren't. So as the season went on, more tape, more film. I see what you're doing, and if you're not going to change it, we're going to figure you out. And we figured you out because you didn't change it. So it's a pretty accurate assessment of why he feels the offense towards the end of the year was horrid, because they were just okay winning games, finding ways. And we're like, good teams find ways to win. Okay, because you're so talented. So the talent took them to 10 wins. The lack of evolution from the coaching staff, seemingly going back to when I hosted on Wednesday with you, John, and what Brandon Graham said, we had the wrong coaches in the wrong places. They didn't evolve this offense the last 7 weeks of the season, and you saw teams adjust to them.
Well, I think that's part of it, but I do think, that's convenient, I will say, because, look, I say it in good times, I say it in bad times. It's players first. Players are more important than coaches. When you're going to the Super Bowl, and the same case is true when you're having a bad season. It's more about the talent. It's more about the players playing up. Now, you can blame the coaches in smaller pockets, but as I'm divvying up that blame, if you want to go percentage-wise, between those three men, Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts, Brian Johnson, Brian would be the lowest in the blame game, and he's the one who paid for it. But that's the nature of the NFL. I mean, that's just it. That's just
Sure.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
When you don't reach expectations, somebody's got to pay for it.
Well, that's in every walk of life, right? The corporate leader looks at the line item, doesn't know the guy's name, and says, "Oh, there's $48,000 we can get off my ledger." Well, you don't even know what this guy does. Don't care. Get rid of him.
Yeah, exactly. So, is that going to make you better? Maybe, maybe not. But I think a lot of it, and Nick Sirianni read the room and understood he had to make a change to satisfy Jeffrey Lurie. And then we'll see if Jalen Hurts takes accountability. I go back to that Seattle game where he and AJ went off the reservation, so to speak, trying to win the game. They were moving that football, Mike. They would have went down the field if they would have stayed patient, probably won that game or at least tied the game. Instead, they tried to go for it all in one play. It's a bad throw, underthrown into double coverage, interception, game over. That's.
But even in that game, they only scored 17 points.
No,
it wasn't like the offense was having a great night.
No, but they were in a position to win a game.
Sure, absolutely.
And that was.
But I think that also shows, John, how much talent the Eagles have on offense, that they were – look, the whole weird part about – and, looking back still, here we are in April, a week from the draft, and you're still like, I can't believe I watched this, is that they won 10 games, and those wins included wins against Kansas City, Buffalo, Dallas along the way. The games they lost, San Francisco, you got beat up, the second Dallas game. Then you're losing to the Cardinals? I mean – come on, what are you talking about here?
Well, the Jets. I mean, the Jets beat.
But the Jets game's early in the year, and you're like, all right, you have a slip up every once in a while.
That's a bad loss, though. Even though that was that one loss in the first in the 10-1 start, you're losing to Zach Wilson. And that's Bryce Huff had a tremendous game for the people who want to watch the tape of Bryce Huff in that game. But getting back to AJ. My whole point of bringing that up wasn't about the particular play. It was, if you remember, after the game, AJ took accountability. Jalen never did. To this day, he never did. That to me has to change. He's got to accept his part of not reaching those expectations to get back to what he was in 2022. And I thought yesterday was a good first step to that, because I thought he was more pragmatic and he was more reflective than he typically was. Both when talking about Brian Johnson.
Yeah.
He said, I just didn't think it was the right time for him. And that's that.
That was the comment that stood
Yeah.
out the most to me, was another example of somebody saying we had the wrong guy. It just was not that he won't be a head coach down the road or something, but I just didn't think it was the right time for him. And when I talked to Britton Covey at the Super Bowl, he said similarly the same thing. I asked him, do you think you guys should have had a more veteran play caller? And he said, yeah, I do. I think we should have had somebody that was a little bit more experienced in running the offense. And then you go to Brandon Graham's comments the other day, which is we had the coaches in the wrong spots. I don't know if the players are trying to scapegoat the coaches, because you know me, John, I'm not a big blame the coach guy, but this team has way too much talent to not say that there had to be something going on.
I just think it's natural from a fan and even a player perspective. They want to protect the players at all costs. And they don't, that's the last guy they want to look at is the player. They want to blame other people, fans particularly. They want to blame other people because they want to believe they have everything in place and they want to believe everybody's great and this and that. And it's typically, to be honest, not the case. The point about Brian, and it's easy to point at Brian and Sean because they didn't reach expectations. You know, go back to 2021. You have a first-year head coach. You have a first-year defensive coordinator. Shane had a little bit of experience, but no play calling as an offensive coordinator. Basically, he was Sean Desai of offense. He had 1 year that wasn't very successful, and he wasn't calling plays 100% of the time. So they had very little experience at the three, and that was a big story at the time. Where's the experience? How is this going to work out? You know, where's Nick Sirianni going to get? And it turns out there's a lot of different ways he can get advice, and he's got Frank Reich on speed dial and all that kind of stuff, and veteran coaches, and he became friends with Vic Fangio very quickly defensively from that perspective, and Vic was helping out in an unofficial capacity, which I always point out, back when things started out, particularly in 2022, obviously, when things really exploded. And we talked not yesterday, but when you were here last about Gannon and how many people had career seasons under Gannon in the Super Bowl year on defense, and Shane, which just had a tremendous feel for play calling after he got that gig midway through 2021. So they're young.
Yeah.
It ain't about being young. It ain't about being inexperienced. You do have to expect some growing pains.
Yeah, you have to start somewhere. I guess the question is starting on a team that has Super Bowl aspirations where you start. Shane and John stepped into a situation that was coming off of a poor season, not a lot of expectations. The other two guys stepped into a situation with very little experience and said, hey, we were in the Super Bowl last year. Take us back and win it.
Well, yeah. And that's the pendulum effect we're dealing with. So, you can't do it, as you mentioned with Britton and BJ, you can't do it with young guys. Now they have Vic Fangio who's been coordinating, since World War II, and you have Kellen Moore, who's been a long time offensive coordinator, even though he's pretty young. And that's how you go back. And we'll see how it works out.
Hey, listen,
but it's not going to work out because of just experience.
I'm all about giving a guy with no experience an opportunity. I mean, heck, every single guy that I hired gets rated from me in another market. Everybody I put on the air, somebody takes them from me. So you give people an opportunity because you think they have talent. I'm all for that. I think the Eagles gave two guys an opportunity that they thought had talent. And for whatever reason, here we are a week from the draft figuring out what do they need to fix some of the problems. Well, we have the answers. The 22nd pick is signed, sealed, and delivered. And Ann Cummings from Pro Football Network has the answer, and he's going to give it to you. All you have to do is stick around right there. When he comes back, we will tell you exactly what the Eagles will do with pick 22 or the trade or a trade up or a trade back. You'll find out next year on Birds 365.
Imagine for a moment that you went to work today and when you came home, you were catastrophically injured. Your life and your family's life. That's what happened to union construction worker Mike Little.
I was scared of what the end was going to be, but to be 100% honest with you, I knew I was going to be all right just by talking with Brian. In my heart, I just knew everything was going to be all right.
Call the firm and find out why they say, "We got this." Call 215-458-2222.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Underdog Fantasy is the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and certainly the easiest when you're watching the NBA. And the NBA playoffs are almost here, and you can win money making picks. What are you waiting for? Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com and use the promo code WIN. An Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. That's UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN. Get ready for the NBA and get ready for the NBA playoffs. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN.
Hi everybody, my name's Jason Lombardi. I'm an inspector at DryTech. At DryTech we offer three major services, the first one being basement waterproofing. The second service we offer is foundation and structural repairs. And then the third service that we offer is mold remediation. If you feel you are having a waterproofing issue, give DryTech a call or check us out online.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News?
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
EAGLES, Eagles.
A Thursday edition of Birds 365 takes us to the draft. 1 week from today, we will have the Eagles' answer. Many a years, Howie Roseman moves, he trades, he doesn't like to stick where he is. And Cummings is here from Pro Football Network, talk a little draft with us, and we go through this, the first mock drafts, the way too early edition comes out on Friday, generally for next year. But Thursday is the day, and at 22, it's hard to gauge. But how much of all the visits and everything is happening is giving us any intel on what Howie Roseman could be thinking?
It's something to take into account whenever you do see a player visit, for sure. But at the same time, there are teams who take players that they don't do visits with. You have a lot of opportunities to affiliate yourselves with these players. The All-Star Circuit, the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, even the Hula Bowl and things like that. You've got the NFL Combine as well, where you can meet informally or formally. And then there's other avenues to information gathered, right? Coaches, teammates, behind the scenes, things like that. So, a visit, I think, is more so for a cross-checking method, right? Especially if they have medical histories to take into account, right? You want your independent team doctors to do that evaluation, but it's more so an ancillary method. It's not something that, you can point to and say, oh, they're picking this guy because he had him for a visit, right? It's a little more, it's more so just cross-checking and eliminating options and trying to narrow down the list so that it's a little easier to make your decision when the time comes.
So how much stock
ahead,
we put into something like, James Palmer tweet yesterday saying the Eagles have met with essentially all the top corners. Do we look at that and say, well, they got to be looking cornerback? Or is that just, in your mind, more due diligence for a position that they really need?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, right? Because yeah, it shows that they're looking at a defensive back probably, but it's narrowing down the list within that window of players, right? You have a lot of potential options, and from the media side, right? A media scout, my job is to tell you all the potential options that they could choose. So I got to look at every single guy, but the Eagles might be looking at certain guys within their scheme parameters, within their relative athletic score parameters, right? Size. So some guys will be ruled out because of that, and then character, medicals. It's all about a process of narrowing down the list, making it thinner, making it a little easier to pinpoint who you want on your team, right? So, and then based on the valuation of the board too, how the board plays out. So it's more so narrowing down the list and just kind of keeping your options open. But it does also show a degree of interest, right? If they focus on one position like corner a little more than others, yeah, you can pretty much assume that they're going to try and get a corner, at least with one of those first 3 picks in the top 55 or so. But, it's a little bit of both because it doesn't sell it completely.
Yeah. And your point about scheme and trying to find that right fit for what you're going to do speaks volumes, Ian. So, with Vic Fangio coming in, the Eagles have been playing the system now, the Vic Fangio sort of system for 3 years. They've had the cover band. Now they have the original.
Mm-hmm.
And Vic plays a lot of zone coverage, a lot of quarters, a lot of cover 6, cover 8, spins off. Communication's a big thing when it comes to the back end. A lot of blown coverages, especially with younger players, when things go poorly in that particular system. So if I gave you those parameters of those top cornerbacks that might be available at 22, who sticks out to Ian Cummings?
At 22, Kool-Aid McKinstry is probably the top one for me. I think if you can get a guy like Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold, if they're there, then you run to the podium. But I expect both of them to be in heavy consideration for top 20 picks. So I think you might have to move up if you want to get them. But Kool-Aid McKinstry is still my CB3. I think he's severely underrated. I think because of Terrion Arnold's rise, he's got flown under the radar at times. But you watch his tape at Alabama, very good in man coverage. But I think the important part for the Eagles, right, because you talk about zone, cover 4, cover 8, right? He's very good at managing route relationships in zone, passing off routes to his teammates. He's very good, very instinctive and smart with those exchanges. And then he knows how to manage space to transition and minimize separation for receivers out of those transitions. So a lot of the trademark discipline issues that you see with a young player, you don't really see with Kool-Aid. He's very smart, intelligent, very measured, quick to react, and very good processor on the back end. But then he can play man and press up guys if you need him to as well. And he's very savvy in run support. So to me, Kool-Aid McKinstry is probably the best fit. Cooper DeJean is the other one, but there's kind of a caveat with him. I think if you're looking at zone schemes for him as a corner, I think he's a little more natural in cover 3, where the middle field is closed and he can play inside saddle more often with his back to the sideline, right, and his eyes on the QB. Otherwise, you probably want to rotate him in at safety, big nickel, and I think there's a lot of versatility that comes with that. And I'm very excited about the possibilities if he were to go to the Eagles. His support ability and blitzing ability in that Fangio scheme too. It's really fun to think about him as kind of a chess piece, but I think if you're looking for a corner and just a corner, Kool-Aid McKinstry to me tops the list.
And he was brought in as one of those late guys, along with the kid from UCLA, Latu, the edge rusher. Those are both sort of medical things you have to clear up. With Kool-Aid, you have Jones fracture, and those types of things. So those visits, they might be medical visits, and the want to get a quick look and say if everything's okay. And that's one, here in Philadelphia, and people still talk about DK Metcalf, and the Eagles didn't pick DK. They red flagged him. They weren't going to take him because of the medical concerns until day 3. And it wasn't about talent. It was about those medical concerns.
Well, on the flip side, they did take Sidney Jones, and that didn't work out. And he was a guy that missed a whole year.
And they took Landon Dickerson, who had serious medical concerns.
So
and that worked out.
The DK Metcalf one's the one that sticks out the most. But obviously, on the flip side of that, and are there guys that you would say, man, if you took this one at 22, a corner, don't like the fit here?
Don't like the fit. I don't think there's any that I would hate. I think there's a few guys that would maybe be reaches, like Max Melton is probably a day 2 guy for me. I have him as early to mid day 2. I don't expect him to go round 1, but just for purposes of discussion, I think that would be a little early for him. I think at 22, you're looking at Kool-Aid, you're looking at Cooper DeJean, who's probably a corner safety hybrid.
What about Wiggins?
Yeah, I was just going to get to him. So you read my mind, but he's one of those guys who's kind of in that 22 to 30 range for me. The only question I have in that Fangio scheme, you got to be able to play support too, right? And his frame is a little bit lighter. He doesn't have great proportional length for his size, and that can impact his ability to deconstruct blocks playing downhill, right? So that's the one concern that I have, and that's why I probably prefer Kool-Aid if it's down to those two. But to your point, Nate Wiggins, I think in zone he does thrive because he's got great route recognition ability. He's got a really tight, smooth, fluid pedal, and he's explosive. He's got the recovery speed to hawk in front of throws and make big plays, but then also close gaps and support, right? So he does have the urgency. I wonder about the frame and how it translates. I want to pack some more mass onto it.
But one missed tackle in Philadelphia, Ian, and it'll go in a negative fashion. So I'm not excited about that run support aspect for Nate Wiggins. That's why I brought him up. I don't think he's necessarily a fit. I think that's a perfect example. A lot of people have mocked Nate Wiggins to the Eagles, and I'm like, I don't see that fit. I just don't see the fit.
Yeah, I can see why you would consider it. And I think if you can pack mass onto his frame, he can get a little bit better. But with his frame, I see him maxing out probably around 185, 190. That's my opinion, right? And you look at the corners that they've generally preferred. They signed James Bradbury, well over 200 pounds, right? Even Darius Slay has a little bit more lean mass on his frame too. So I think the Eagles are probably going to look at guys in that 195, 200 range. And that's where you think about guys like Kool-Aid and Cooper DeJean. I think those are the two that stand out. Max Melton is a little bit leaner too, but the difference with him is that he's got 32-inch arms. So he's got better proportional length, and that shows up in press coverage and in run support, where he's actually able to get inside guys' frames. So that's where the fit is a little tricky with Nate Wiggins, but I can't deny, if you're willing to bank on the recovery speed and the playmaking ability and the route recognition, all of those tools are there. So there is reason to consider him, but he's not a perfect fit, and we need to acknowledge that.
Offensive tackle would be the other big position people are focused on for two reasons, Ian. It's so deep in this particular draft at the top. So in theory, especially if you have, I don't know where you are, but we always get to this point in the draft process a week out, and there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks. It might even be Penix, 5 in the top 22. Some will try to convince yourself Bo Nix will go in there, and it could be 6. Which I don't necessarily buy, and we'll see how it shakes out. But the more quarterbacks, the better it is for the Eagles at 22, because that means a good positional player will probably drop even a little bit further than he might if it wasn't a big-time quarterback draft. So from that perspective, there's a lot of tackles. Now, the Eagles don't need a tackle. They have Lane Johnson, who's still playing at an all-pro level. He's got a couple years left on his contract, still playing at a high level, says he wants to continue playing at least for a couple more years. They just gave Jordan Mailata $66 million. They don't need a tackle immediately. What they need is a right guard who can slide out to right tackle. So of that group of the tremendous tackles available, who is the best in your mind that can start short-term, play right guard, and then eventually kick out?
There are a few names that come to mind for me. Troy Fautanu from Washington is the first one for sure. 6'4", 320, 34.5-inch arms. He's an incredible athlete on the lateral plane with his recovery capacity, but then also in the ground game, you can tell he's got the power to drive guys. He's very explosive in space, and he's a physical guy, but he's got the hand usage as well. So Troy Fautanu, for me, the big thing with him too is he actually has pre-existing guard experience. So it's not a projection like Taliese Fuaga or JC Latham, guys who project well to guard with their traits, but they don't have that experience that Troy Fautanu has. So Fautanu is the dream. That said, I think he's going to go top 20 at this point. His tape is phenomenal. His traits are very good. He's experienced. He's got a really good high floor, high ceiling combination. I could see him going as early as 10 to the New York Jets. I think that's, his ceiling for sure. So it's a little tricky. It depends on who falls to you, but I mentioned Fuaga and Latham. I think those are the next two guys within that mold. Taliese Fuaga from Oregon State, 6'6", 330, and he's got, I think, around 33 1/4 arms, so around average for an offensive tackle, and that's caused some people to consider moving him inside the guard actually as a prospect. And again, in that role, he translates very well. Explosive, tenacious, physical finisher, right? And I think for his size, acquires and maintains leverage and pad level very well through reps. So there's a lot of tools that translate well. but it's just you don't have the pre-existing experience that Fatanu has. And the same thing with Latham. I think Latham is more of a vertical straight line mauler, right? But still a very physical, powerful player who fits that blend for you. So you've got guys like Amarius Mims and Tyler Guyton too, but I think they're strictly tackles. I don't think they translate quite as well, guard.
Now, we know Howie likes to move a lot. I mean, very rarely does he just stick in his spot. You mentioned a bunch of corners and offensive linemen, and I guess we could throw edge rushers into this conversation because edge, defensive line, tackle, and offensive line is generally where they like to kind of go, although they have taken wide receivers in the past in the few drafts. I don't think that's going to be the case here. But if there is someone, Bill Belichick yesterday was interesting on the McAfee show saying, your turn comes up. You have no idea what's going to happen in front of you. And, Vince Wilfork was at a spot we didn't think he'd be there, and we made a move. And he mentioned multiple times that it happened. So who are a couple of those guys when they get to a certain number, falling-wise, that Roseman should pick up the phone and act on? Because we know he will if there's a guy that he likes. But who are those couple guys maybe at those positions where, man, that guy's at 15, and so we got to get there?
It's a good question, and I think it's a little tricky too because you're at 22, right? So there are certain players like Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, right? If he falls to, say, 16, you got the Seahawks there. One pick later, you got the Jaguars, who are a really good bet to pick him if he's there because they have a big need at corner. He's a scheme fit. So, again, it depends on where they are. I'd say Quinyon Mitchell is a big one because I think he fits the scheme. I think, again, off-man zone. He's got very good route intelligence. He can click and close in an instant. He's got that 4.28 speed, right? So he's really a blazer when he's closing, and then he's a elite ball producer as well at the catch point. I think he had 6 interceptions and 45 pass deflections in his career at Toledo. So he's one of the most instinctive playmakers that I've seen with his positioning, with his ability to play through the catch point. And then he's got enough wheeling physicality to play press man too. So I think the scheme fit, I think the upside, if he's there at 16, right, you could consider making a move up, but that's a pretty big move up too. You're going to have to spend a little bit for him and you might as well wait. So he's a candidate for me. Troy Fatanu is a candidate for me. If he falls to say, like 17 or 18, I would consider moving up for him because again, he fits the scheme very well. He can play guard in the immediate timeline and go to tackle. And then eventually, he can be a all-pro player for you. I think he has that kind of potential with his physical ability and his nuance. If I had to pick one more, the edge group is tough. I would pass on the edge group because I think there's a decent chance that one of those top 4 will be there at 22. So I don't know who's going to be there, but we know Latu, the medicals could scare away some teams, right? Chop Robinson is a polarizing prospect. So I think there's a good chance that one of them is available. I think you're looking at a corner or a tackle, or maybe a defensive tackle, because you got Milton Williams as a free agent in 2025. You could improve the depth of that rotation alongside Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Let's say you're really high on Byron Murphy II. There's been some reports that he could be a top 10 pick sleeper, right? So if he falls to a certain point, you want to beef up that rotation, get just absolute game wreckers on the interior. That could be a move you make too. So I think it's all about playing the board. Again, it's different for every guy, but I think that 16 to 18 range, if one of those blue chip players falls, that's a good opportunity.
I'm going to give you a left field like Bill was talking about, because the Eagles don't have a need right now, an immediate need at tight end, but it's very famous around these parts. Ian, they drafted Dallas Goedert basically when Zach Ertz was Dallas Goedert's current age. So they had a big time tight end and they started that process. Brock Bowers is a kid to me that belongs in the top 10, but we all know teams in this league don't necessarily want to take tight ends that high. And there might be 1 or 2, but if that 1 or 2 teams go in a different direction, I think Brock Bowers is one of the best players in this draft, and he might fall a little bit. What do you think his ceiling is? That one team that, all right, if he lasts to this point, there's no way he's going to stay there. How low do you think Brock Bowers could fall?
My floor for him is 15, the Indianapolis Colts. I think that's where it ends for him. I think he's a phenomenal fit for that Shane Steichen offense. And you look at their tight end room, like they have a few decent guys, rotational guys, Kylan Granson, for example. But, more often than not, and they have Jelani Woods, who hasn't really done much, right? They drafted him early in the top 100, and he hasn't really panned out. He's kind of a non-factor right now. So I look at the Colts and what they need at the tight end position, not just what they need at the tight end position, but what they need from a weapon in general, right? You've got Michael Pittman Jr., you've got Josh Downs. You need that vertical stressor who can work up the seam, who can operate as a big slot weapon, right? You can seam touches in the rack phase and the short range. Brock Bowers, to me, is a perfect fit for all of those things. And I think Steichen is one of those mad genius offensive coordinators who would know best how to use them. And then Anthony Richardson has the arm talent to get the most out of him on the vertical plane. And, Brock Bowers also helps scheme easy solutions for him as a young, growing QB. So to me, that's the floor. I think if Brock Bowers gets to 14, and if you're the Eagles and you're in love with him, I think that's where you got to move up to. Because I think if you let him go to 15, the Colts are going to take him.
Interesting. Would they do that? Take a look.
That's
at
a little bit high.
That's
See, I got to get, but if he starts to drip to 18, they did with Andre Dillard, and it didn't work out. They didn't do a lot of homework because they assumed Andre Dillard would be long gone, and all of a sudden he starts falling on draft day, and they're like, "We should go get this kid," and it didn't work out, but that they've shown the mentality of they will do that type of thinking in the past.
Yeah.
So I throw it out there as a curveball.
Well, what I think is another interesting storyline, guys, would be, and you brought up defensive tackle, is how much did they value what Fletcher Cox brought, and how much do they think what they currently have can make up for it? Do they trust Jordan Davis enough? What kind of role do they see him having, or do they think they need to get another top flight tackle as part of that rotation because they just don't have enough belief that Jordan Davis can have a bigger role? I mean, that to me, if you're sitting there at 22, you're asking yourself, do we really think Jordan Davis is ready to take another step? I think we think Jalen Carter will, but is Jordan Davis essentially, is this what he is? I like Milton Williams too. Do they look at him as a guy that's going to play 50% of the snaps? I mean, an uptick. So the Fletcher Cox retirement, I think, certainly has them making asking questions internally at that spot. No?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And again, you guys are more tuned into the Eagles than I am, but looking at it from the surface, I mean,
guess based on the talent that might be there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the big thing. There's a good chance, again, that Johnny Newton or Byron Murphy II will be there. Both of those guys are first-round players for me. Johnny Newton's actually a top 15 prospect for me. So, I think Johnny Newton, my comp for him is Jarrell Casey. I think the hyper-elite flexibility that he has at that position is a trait that allows him to finish at a level that other DTs just simply can't, right? So I think the explosion, the run game IQ, but also the pass rushing versatility to rush from 3-tech, 4-eye, 5-tech, really exciting with him, Johnny Newton. And then Byron Murphy II, you've got a really sturdy, well-leveraged defender in the run game at 1-tech, 2-eye, but then he's a disruptor at 3-tech with that explosiveness and that torquing capacity with his hands. So I think either one of those guys, right? If you look at your situation, I think the key thing here is that past Jalen Carter, that 3-tech rotation is not very deep. I was a fan of Moro Ajomo as a late round prospect, but I think there's still room for him to keep growing, and he might just be a rotational guy. Yeah, he might max out as that, right? So you're not sure. And then Jordan Davis is more of a nose tackle, right? At 0-tech, a 1-tech, a guy who's going to encumber blocks and hold double teams. So that 3-tech rotation, to me, looks a little susceptible to turnover because Milton Williams, like I said, he's going to be a free agent in 2025 right now as it stands. His contract is set to expire. So they could extend him, but at the same time, if you're not willing to shell out decent money on that, there's a good opportunity to re-up with a really good player in Johnny Newton or Byron Murphy II. And we know Howie Roseman likes the trenches, so it could be a wild card pick that he decides.
Never a surprise if Howie goes inside. 50 or 53, though, Ian. I want to go there, and I need a slot receiver, and I need a coverage linebacker.
Well, hold on. Can I ask this question? If you're going to go to slot receiver at 50 and 53, if there's a receiver at 22 and they take him, the story would be, what's the future for A.J. Brown? But would there be a receiver at that spot that's just you can't pass on?
That you can't pass on? Well, obviously one of the top 3 guys. So we know
that's
not happening. So
Brian Thomas.
Yeah, I'd say, I think the top one would be Brian Thomas Jr. I wouldn't say that you can't pass on him. I think you can, but it would be very compelling for me to take him there because again,
John, wouldn't that tell a story? If they took a receiver at 22?
You're because I think a lot of people are focused on Devontae Smith getting
the contract,
$25 million a year, but that doesn't kick in till 2026. And by that time, $25 million a year is going to look pretty good.
True. It's just, the whole element of having two receivers making that kind of money. At what point does one say, well, he's making what I'm at,
Well, the problem becomes A.J. Brown because Jefferson signs, Jamar Chase signs, Brandon Ayuk, C.D. Lamb, and he's going to be well over $30 million by that point. But that's why you take a receiver. But I think it's more likely at 50, 53. So
agree. If there was somebody at 22 that if he was there and you said, hey, we have this financial burden coming up, let's see if we can replenish the coffers for a little cheaper price, similar to what you do at tight end.
Then I'll kind of expand it to Ian and say, all right, give me somebody who can start in the slot, similar to what we talked about in the offensive line, start as a wide receiver 3. And obviously the Eagles receivers are very versatile. AJ moves inside, Devontae can move. They can all play at XZ and flex anyway, but somebody's going to be in the slot the majority of the time and then maybe can kick outside. Like I remember the Jefferson draft and people are saying, well, because he played in the slot LSU. And you know this, Ian. Why didn't anybody go back to the year before when he was great outside? And he turned into what he turned into. I'm not saying you're going to get a Justin Jefferson, but at 50 to 53, is there a player that projects maybe inside early and then can do a little bit more as you get him involved?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, and real quick, Brian Thomas Jr., I think he would be a very exciting fit, right? Would I would do it? I'm not sure, but I think his ability to win on slot fades and also expand to the boundary, be a rack threat, it would be very exciting for sure. But to 50 and 53, I think there are options available to you. The ones that stand out to me, Ricky Pearsall, Roman Wilson, Jalen Polk from Washington is one of my favorite ones. I think he'd be a phenomenal fit. I think he kind of fits the Puka profile with the way that he wins, being 6'1", 203, 32-inch arms, but he's very alignment versatile. So again, to your point, versatility, a big thing. He can take reps on the boundary, in the slot, movement Z, right? He can take reps off motions and jet sweeps, right? But he can do crossers, mesh routes, deep crossers as well, slant routes. There's a lot to his game that suggests versatility. And then also at the catch point, he's one of the best converters in this class with his body control, his hand-eye coordination, and he's a pretty fluid rack threat too. So Jalen Polk from Washington would be my guy, and the other Washington guy as well, Jalen McMullen, right? I mean, your example, Justin Jefferson, his final year was a little bit more in the slot, but the year before showed more boundary reps. That's kind of something that you see in Jalen McMullen too. He wasn't always on the field because of injuries this past year, but going back earlier in his career, you saw more boundary reps, and he has the route running chops to win there. He has the vertical speed, and being around 6'1", a little bit leaner, but he's got good length too, a good wingspan, catch radius. So I think those few guys really stand out to me. Pearsall is a phenomenal route runner, but also pretty workmanlike in the blocking game too. So if you need him to block and open space, you can do that. Roman Wilson, same with him. There are other guys that do have slot potential, like Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky, but I don't think he has the boundary utility, the versatility that other guys have. So I think you'd be confined to those route runners who can win as separators, but also provide that versatility and three-level framework.
Yeah, good. I like both Washington guys as well. Polk is a guy at 50, 53 would be very interesting to give them. What they've had in that slot has been not very good, very inconsistent, as we know. And it would just be another weapon. But as John pointed out earlier, Ian, Brock Bowers might be a guy you would trade up for. But if you need a tight end, or if they're looking at a tight end, what does that 50-53 look at? Because John's right. They have taken Zach Ertz in the second round and Dallas Goedert in the second round. So it feels like a year where that would be a spot that they would look at tight end.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's one guy on my board that stands out. You've got other guys like Jared Wiley, Jatavian Sanders, Theo Johnson, Cade Stover, but they're more fringe day 2, day 3 players for me. I think the one player that if I'm the Eagles, if I really want a tight end with one of those two picks, the one player that I would hone in on is Ben Sinnott from Kansas State. He's my tight end too. He's a top 50 player for me. 6'4", 250 pounds, really fluid route runner for his size. I mean, his bend and fluidity on in breakers and digs is really impressive to me, but he's got a full route tree. He can run, stop and goes, in and outs up the seam as well. He's got strong hands over the middle of the field. He's a very physical rack threat with that leg churn, right? And then he's a versatile blocker too. I think Dallas Goedert's more of your big inline seam guy, but Ben Sinnott can play H-back. He can play out wide. A lot of versatility that comes with him outside on those 1-2 personnel looks. And then at the same time too, I think that usage versatility lends itself well as a receiving threat in a target funnel on late downs and clutch downs too. So Ben Sinnott, to me, has the best 3-level framework. He's got some Dallas Clark to him, I think, with the way that he moves, the explosion, the agility, the fluidity, the really crisp direction changes, and then having the play strength that comes with his frame too. And then he's a workman-like player. You know, all the reviews of his character are very good. So I think you're looking at a guy with that versatility and that day one integration freedom to really elevate your offense.
At IC_draft, Ian Cummings, you know, you're a first round pick from my perspective.
I appreciate
you do a tremendous job. Linebacker, I sort of alluded to before, that's the weakest spot on the Eagles. I mean, they need to add a body, and they're not going to pick one at 22, nor does one deserve to be picked there. Edgerrin Cooper's the guy, but I think they're in no man's land. I don't think there's any way he lasts to 50. If I said that coverage linebacker, 50-53 again, that's the area we're talking about. Who's your guy?
Yeah, there's a few guys. I think Edgerrin Cooper, there's a chance that he's there. I think it's
perfect.
He's explosive for sure. I think his coverage can get a little more improvement out of his hip leverage maintenance at the second level, getting depth. But I think, again, explosive coming downhill, his range and pursuit, and then his block deconstruction and angle IQ is truly top notch. So that would be a phenomenal pick. But a few guys that I look at, Peyton Wilson is a big wild card because of his medicals, right? He's got multiple season-ending injuries in his history, and his frame being 6'4", but under 240 pounds, he's really lean, really narrow, and you wonder about his durability. So if you're thinking about coverage and range and support, right, and tackling ability, he's one of the best guys. He's my top overall graded linebacker, not accounting for medicals, right? But the medicals are such a landmine for him. I think it's really difficult to pinpoint his value, so he may drop. The two guys that stand out to me with more security, Junior Colson from Michigan, and then Trevin Wallace from Kentucky. I think those two guys. And then you've got Cedric Gray from North Carolina, who I think is a good sleeper in round 3. But Trevin Wallace and Junior Colson, to me, have a really exciting blend of upside and immediate utility as coverage linebackers. Junior Colson is one of the better coverage linebackers that I've seen in my time. I think his sample size, you look at his hip leverage IQ, again, he gets depth very well, but he can also manage spacing with overlapping routes. And then he's got a really good trigger on in breakers as well. He's physical at the catch point, and he's a tough guy. He was playing the better part of the year with two clubs on his hands. And there's actually an interview where he says, like, hey, I wasn't coming off the field unless I couldn't move, right? So you want that toughness at the linebacker spot. You want that over the middle of the field. I think at times in the box, he can be a little too hesitant processing gaps. That's where he stands to improve. With Wallace, it's kind of the opposite. Sometimes he'll be a little too aggressive and flush through gaps and open up lanes for runners on the cutback. So both of them have things to work on in the box and run defense. But Trevin Wallace too, man, 6'1", 240, almost 33-inch arms. So really good disruptive radius and coverage. And then he's shown that he can mirror and match running backs on wheel routes, and he's got the vertical speed to just dwarf them over the sideline. And then he's got some pretty good mirroring ability in the middle of the field too. So Trevin Wallace, Junior Colson, those are the names that stand out to me. If I had to bet, I'd say the Eagles probably take one of them with one of those two picks. But again, it all depends on the valuation and, other factors.
Well, we've gone just about at every level. We had a conversation about a week ago that basically was saying there is a reason that the Eagles could use a player at 22 at every spot on the field. I mean, they have somebody there, but they can improve. And there's they have Bradbury and Slay, but you could get younger. You've got this offensive line that's pretty good, but you need a right guard that can possibly move out. You have two good receivers, but your third spot's been weak. Your tight end is getting to an age where you need another one. Almost every spot has somebody, but is there a safety at 22 that you would say that guy is the pick? He's the fit right next to Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. He's sitting right there for you because safety is a spot this team generally does not look at.
We've already talked about him, but Cooper DeJean, I think, would be the guy. I think it's tough because it is a projection because he played corner pretty much primarily at Iowa, right? So it's a big projection, but the whole evaluation with Cooper DeJean is that his traits translate so well at safety. It's playing with his eyes to the quarterback. It's the route recognition, the trigger quickness, right? The ability to stay fluid on his pedal and use kick slides to manage leverage as well. His ability to play and manage space is truly phenomenal. And then he's a gliding athlete. He's got that range and speed. We saw that at his pro day, verified, but you can see it on the tape. When he clicks and closes, when he reacts, he closes ground in an instant. He can make plays on the ball. He's physical at the catch point. He's like a de facto linebacker and support too. His playing weight will be closer to 210 pounds. And he's a rocked up dude. Like, he can play, he can deconstruct blocks, he can hold the line, and he can make tackles at the line of scrimmage too. So I think his ability to just be that Swiss Army safety where he can play too high, probably not a single high guy. Maybe I do think he has the range though. I think he has the playmaking ability, the vision as well. So, I'm not averse to trying him there, but especially too high in the box, right? And then you can play him on the boundary and cover 3 zone looks, right? I think he has that utility to stay at corner in some schematic looks, but his versatility, his projected versatility that comes from his high level physical and foundational framework, to me, it's a phenomenal fit at safety. But then in Vic Fangio's scheme, where Fangio can let loose and have him attack on some plays, that's even more exciting. So Cooper DeJean, I know it's a projection, but 22 overall, if you picked him there and decided to try him out at safety, you'd have no complaints from me.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. That's, by the way, I came into this conversation wanting to take Cooper DeJean, and you have now sold me that I'm not changing my mind.
That's what I'm here for.
1 week away from the NFL draft and Cummings Pro Football Network here on Birds 365. We told you at the beginning of the conversation, he knew who they were going to take at 22. He read my mind. We both feel the same guy. Cooper DeJean is the pick. We'll talk about it next week. All right, Ian. Good stuff, man. We learned a lot, and hopefully the viewers got a lot of information now that they can all act like they've watched every single college game this year and figure out who they like.
Yep, that's what it's all about. I appreciate you guys having me on. One more week.
Yeah,
thanks,
man.
Ian. Appreciate it, bud.
That's the thing, John. Now, I watch a good amount of college football because I went to a school that has, Big 12. I watch a lot of Big 12. Ben Sennett, Kansas State, big dude, man. So when he mentions guys like that, those are guys I've watched and seen. But I love this time of the year where everybody knows prospects that they've never seen.
It's funny because I always you're so bogged down when you cover an NFL team. I watch very little college football during the season. So I'm like the coaches. I come in last minute.
Yeah.
And I lean in on people like Ian. Ian's one of the guys I trust.
I agree. And one thing, though, I will say about Cooper DeJean, because their defense was so good this year, a lot of people bet the unders on them all the time. So you're watching their games a lot because you're betting the unders, and you would just see this guy flying all over, so much so that he broke his damn leg, because he's just flying all over the place. By the way, he's also an excellent punt returner. I think he was second in the Big Ten.
Well, the Eagles don't need a punt returner. They might need a kickoff returner because it's more relevant, but Britton Covey's pretty good as a punt returner. And we'll see how that shakes out, of how much more kickoffs are relevant this year.
I think that's going to be a big factor.
Yeah. And that might mean something on day 3, a little bit more this year than in prior years, when you try to find somebody legitimate return experience and ability. That might factor in, but I think more in day 3. With Cooper DeJean, I think the versatility hurts. I really do. From the perspective, not from him, I think it's great for his, but for the Eagles finding a fit. I don't think they're looking for a safety in round 1, as Ian kind of made the projection. I don't know if that's the way you feel. If he can play outside corner, they might take him, but they take him to be a corner.
Well, is this a situation similar to what you have with what you've had over the years? You draft Cam Jurgens because he's a center. You play him at right guard. You draft Cooper DeJean because
I think in that case it would be
because you have Bradbury.
It's a little more frequent on the offensive line, because backup offensive linemen in the NFL need to have versatility. You can only dress 8. Most teams dress 8. You have an interior backup. You have a swing tackle. Some teams only dress 7 because of that reason. Last year, the Eagles kind of piecemealed it with Jack Driscoll and Fred Johnson, but as far as not having a legitimate swing tackle. But you're always doing that with the offensive line. You're not doing that a lot in the secondary. Some guys can. The last guy the Eagles had, Malcolm Jenkins, was the one who played all over the place, and he embraced that and took it as a challenge. There's not a lot of guys who do that. Brian Flores, I bring up Josh Metellus all the time, played every position on the field. He played 13 positions last year, Mike. They made up a position for him, a couple of positions. And not a lot. He's not playing defensive line for 100 snaps, but occasionally you throw that curveball in there.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of players like that. In Vic Fangio's scheme, Vic's been around for a long time. You can look at his scheme. There aren't a lot of guys who move from corner and safety in the game. In other words, there might be a guy who plays corner and somebody gets hurt at safety and you have to move him to safety. And the Eagles have done that in the past with Avonte Maddox and vice versa with C.J. Gardner-Johnson moving to the slot and back and forth. But Jonathan Gannon always called the slot and safety mirrored positions in this defense. So you might see that. But when it comes to outside corner, when it comes to somebody playing single high, cover 3, as Ian said, all these different zone coverages Vic throws out there, and more it's going to be quarters, cover 6, cover 8 than cover 3. There's guys, there's corners, and there's safeties. So I don't see the need for that. If they're going to take, and I'm not saying they can't take Cooper DeJean. If they take him, though, they're going to take him to be a cornerback. That's my opinion.
Yeah, he played like a Leo position. They kind of created a position for him at Iowa too, where he was.
Yeah, I don't see that happening here. I just, there's no evidence that he's done that in the past.
All right, so there you go. A lot of draft conversation 1 week from the draft, and obviously more nuggets will be coming along between now and Thursday when the Eagles make their pick, and of course. We'll have more discussion on it. Birds 365. Brooks Cabina will be joining us in the 9 o'clock hour. Jalen Hurts yesterday had some interesting things to say. We'll talk about that and more coming up here on Birds 365.
Imagine for a moment that you went to work today and when you came home, you were catastrophically injured. Your life and your family's life. That's what happened to union construction worker Mike Little.
I was scared of what the end was going to be, but to be 100% honest with you, I knew I was going to be all right just by talking with Brian. In my heart, I just knew everything was going to be all right.
Call the firm and find out why they say, "We got this." Call 215-458-2222.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Underdog Fantasy is the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and certainly the easiest when you're watching the NBA. And the NBA playoffs are almost here, and you can win money making picks. What are you waiting for? Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com and use the promo code WIN. An Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. That's UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN. Get ready for the NBA and get ready for the NBA playoffs. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN.
Hi everybody, my name's Jason Lombardi. I'm an inspector at DryTech. At DryTech we offer 3 major services, the first one being basement waterproofing, the second service we offer is foundation and structural repairs, and then the third service that we offer is mold remediation. If you feel you are having a waterproofing issue, give DryTech a call or check us out online.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News.
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
EAGLES. Eagles.
All right, hour 2, Birds 365. I'm Mike Gill. That's John McMullen. What are you shaking your head at? What did I do already?
Not you. Britton Covey, a lot of Britton Covey hate in the comments. I'm like, what do you want? The guy was second in the NFL in punt return average. He led the league in punt return yards. Led the league. They go, oh, he only takes spare catches, Mike. Stop to lead the league when you're only taking spare catches. Sometimes I wonder what people watch. You had the best punt returner in football last season. The best. Led the league in 20-plus yard returns as well.
Yeah.
He was the best punt returner in football last season. And
by the way, one of the nicest men I've ever talked to in my life.
He's phenomenal guy.
And you almost feel bad for him sometimes because he's very honest and truthful to the point where I feel like he, after the fact, feels like, did I say something I shouldn't have said? Like, because he wants to give it to you straight.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's like he's letting almost too much out there. But
it's one of those things. If you met Britton and you talked to him out at the Super Bowl, he does not look like a football player. Let's be honest.
I am bigger than him.
Yeah, he's 5'8". He's 170 pounds. Yeah. He's listed at 5'8".
Yeah.
He's 170 pounds soaking wet, if that.
Yeah, we should all be rooting for that guy.
Yeah, you would think. Yeah. You would think. I don't get it. I don't care.
Yeah, listen, I do think the new kickoff rule is going to add a lot of intrigue and strategy to the game, to where you're right. They probably are going to have to get a legitimate – teams are going to have to go back to getting a guy who's not just going to do this in the end zone, you know. It's going to have to actually do something, and I think it's going to be – I don't
know if it's going to be that traditional kick returner, which was, to me, I was always talk about, to me, the best kick returner of all time is Cordero Patterson.
Better than Hester?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at Cordero, he's already got like 9 touchdowns. Remember, half his career was after they devalued kickoffs. You remember the Chip Kelly game when he wouldn't kick to him? He lost the game because he was scared to kick to him.
Yeah.
And,
I guess Hester was more on punts too. I just remember in fantasy football.
He was more of a dual. He was more of a dual guy, Devin Cordero. But there's a difference between, and that's why what Devin Hester does is so impressive. There's a difference between punt returns and kickoff returns in the traditional way. And that punt returns are the short area quickness guys. You got to make the first guy miss. Kickoff returns were about power, break the first tackle, have long speed, go.
Yeah.
In theory, with the XFL rules, it's going to be more like a punt return.
Yep.
Than a kickoff. So you might need a different style guy than you needed before when kickoffs were relevant. But we'll see how it shakes out. You always have to wait and see how the NFL special teams coaches handle it. But yeah, I mean, I don't think the Eagles are going to say, hey, let's let Britton Covey return kicks as well. So they probably think it's going to be more like the traditional.
Why would they, he is on the team as essentially a punt returner only. It's not like he's a wide receiver playing a lot of snaps. Why wouldn't you say, hey, we have a guy that does both? You're taking up a roster spot, right?
Yeah, I think he should be given an opportunity because I think it's going to be different. But until you see it, you don't know. And NFL teams move very slowly when it comes to stuff like that. And, even when it didn't matter, they tried Quez Watkins back there, who was one of the worst kickoff returners I've ever seen because he was not a guy who was physical that could break that first tackle. And they finally went to Boston Scott, and Boston did it a little bit better because he could break that first tackle. And it was actually pretty effective in the limited, but you're talking 12, 13 kickoff returns a year under these previous rules, which were basically meaningless. So you'd say, all right, we'll throw somebody back there. We'll take it at the 25, as you mentioned. And it should be more relevant this year, and I think that's a good thing
Yeah.
to bring that particular play back into the mix.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely think it adds another element to and the strategy of it. Of do you want to what the ball goes to the 30 or the 35?
They changed it. I'd have to look it up. It was going to be they moved it back 5 yards, so I think they moved it from 35 to 30. I think people were too
Right, and that's
scared.
if the ball rolls through the end or you kick it. There's two different ways. Like if the ball hits and rolls through the end zone, it goes somewhere, or if you kick it like through the uprights, it gets placed, I think, at the something to that effect at the 30. But it definitely makes you have
well,
to
they're trying to force you to
make them
kick
return
off.
it.
Yes. To get the play back in the game. So so it's 40 to 35, I guess. So it was going to be 40, now it's the 35. But
Yeah.
either way, they made it less punitive because I think a lot of special teams coaches were a little freaked out by that poor field position potential, and they probably would have had it a little bit more difficult to push it through.
You watching any UFL?
Haven't watched much of it. I find it ironic that the NFL took the XFL's kickoff rule, but the UFL didn't. They're doing it in a more traditional method. I do know that. I did see that first week where the kid kicked back-to-back, I think 64-yard field goals.
Well, didn't the Dallas kicker come from one of the two leagues?
Yeah. And he had an all-pro year.
It was an awesome year, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember if he was in the XFL or the USFL.
Yeah. Well, same thing. Now it's
the same thing. But last year,
now there's another one. John Parker Romo, I think, is a former XFL kicker. Now I forget who signed him to be a kicker, but they're opening their eyes to more, I think, soccer people and things like that because of what Brandon Aubrey did with the Cowboys. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to talk to Brooks Cabina coming up in a couple of minutes here. But before we do, Jalen Hurts yesterday, we were trying to get to it in the first hour. We started going off on all sorts of expositories. But I mentioned that the Brian Johnson, him saying, maybe he just wasn't his time, was one of the comments that stood out to me. But he talked about, Kellen Moore, Saquon Barkley. Apparently he now has a squat partner, to somebody that he can compete with.
He's going to squat more. Saquon, Saquad or Jalen.
Exactly. Yeah. But was there something like if you were writing an article based on that press conference yesterday from Jalen, was there
I did.
A major? Yeah. Oh, well, go ahead. And
found that. Well, I thought the first two things, Brian, that quote stood out to me with Brian Johnson. I just didn't think it was the right time for him, and that's that. But also, Jalen called himself a sponge. He's all ears right now. He mentioned there's an importance to getting a foundation in something, and he wants to give Kellen Moore, Doug Nussmeier an opportunity to build that foundation for the offense, and then he'll probably speak up, get a little bit more vocal in an attempt to tailor things to his own comfort level. But then he also admitted, he yearns for sustainability. I always think about Seinfeld. Do you ever yearn? Well, Jalen yearns, and he yearns for sustainability and consistency.
He said he felt like he was back in college now with all the turnover.
Yeah. I don't think that's realistic at this level anymore. I wish it were, but there's one of two.
Who was the guy from the cult, Tom Moore, that just stood on the sideline looking over his glasses for 20 years?
Tom was great. Yeah, it's easy with Peyton Manning, and plus Tom was, 100 years old, so nobody was eager to. There's a lot of ageism going on there, but
it's a very interesting conversation. Everybody's trying to get younger. Yet you get younger, and now it causes you to have turnover.
And now they're talking about lack of experience. And, well, there's two, you're either too good and Shane leaves, or you're too bad and nobody has the patience to let Brian Johnson grow.
Or you're too old and you're not creative enough.
Yeah, well, that too. Even
so
though
now we have a problem where that's why offense is down in this league.
By the way, the most creative offensive mind in the NFL, in my opinion, and I don't know about yours, and we'll get Brooks's opinion. We got to get to him. But my opinion, it's Andy Reid, who I don't know. How old is Andy? He's senior citizen. I know he's past 65. So it's not a death knell as a fellow old guy. I'm not that old, but you can be innovative if you want, if you keep an open mind.
And think about, John, it's funny because yesterday was the anniversary of Donovan McNabb getting drafted. Think about what that offense looked like and what his offense looks like now.
Oh yeah, well that's what I mean.
Yeah,
and if anything, these the younger guys, they all run the same damn thing.
That's true. Yeah. All right, well, we'll get into that. Yeah, Jalen Hurts yesterday had some interesting things to say, and it was the first time we heard from Jalen. And I said, if it's the last time we hear from Jalen, I'd be okay with that. He can hang out under the radar all offseason. I'm sure that won't be the case. But we'll talk about that and more coming up with Brooks Cabina on Birds 365.
Imagine for a moment that you went to work today and when you came home, you were catastrophically injured. Your life and your family's life. That's what happened to union construction worker Mike Little.
I was scared of what the end was going to be, but to be 100% honest with you, I knew I was going to be all right just by talking with Brian. In my heart, I just knew everything was going to be all right.
Call the firm and find out why they say, "We got this." Call 215-458-2222.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Underdog Fantasy is the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and certainly the easiest when you're watching the NBA. And the NBA playoffs are almost here, and you can win money making picks. What are you waiting for? Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com and use the promo code WIN. An Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. That's UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN. Get ready for the NBA and get ready for the NBA playoffs. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN.
Hi everybody, my name's Jason Lombardi. I'm an inspector at DryTech. At DryTech we offer three major services, the first one being basement waterproofing. The second service we offer is foundation and structural repairs. And then the third service that we offer is mold remediation. If you feel you are having a waterproofing issue, give DryTech a call or check us out online.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News?
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
EAGLES, Eagles.
Back into it on a Thursday morning here on Birds 365. Brooks Cabina from The Athletic is here. He is in sponge mode, just like Jalen Hurts is.
You're repping the brand. Well done.
I had to do it. I had to do it.
You wrote about the sponge mode, Kellen Moore. I was just talking about Tom Moore. You take a look at Jalen Hurts getting ready for another round of OTAs and offseason and another new offense. Do we think that Jalen Hurts being in sponge mode and learning more will elevate him to another level? Or have we seen the best of Jalen Hurts already?
It's an interesting question because we haven't yet seen Jalen Hurts in a system where he could build from. I mean, this will be the 5th offensive play caller that he's had at the NFL level. He had 4 in college. This is just his state of being, which is, interesting enough for a quarterback that he's had such sustainable success over that time period with different play callers. I mean, Sirianni handing it off to Shane Steichen, I guess, was within kind of the similar system at the start of it. But I think the main question about this really is, how are Kellen Moore and Doug Nussmeier going to use Jalen Hurts' strengths within whatever offense that they're building? I mean, if you look the last couple of years, what Moore's done with Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott before, there's a lot of success there. There's a lot in terms of, I think, more of from conversations I've had with others, it's kind of like more classic quarterback progressions and things like that. I mean, obviously they need to work with handling the blitz. That was a big problem last year, but sponge mode is what I took of interest from that is that sometimes you'll see quarterbacks who have new offensive coordinators, head coaches come in, and they want to be a part of the process. They want to jump into the room and they want to have their voice heard, and they want to insert, hey, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to put this in, and they kind of sometimes make demands. It didn't seem like Jalen Hurts was in that way. I mean, by saying sponge mode, he says he's very removed. This is what he says. And on the outside, just kind of letting them do their thing, present it to him, and then that's how he fits. And just my impression after covering a part of a season with Jalen Hurts, it seems that he is more on the receptive end. Tell me what to do. Let's work with this and let's see what happens. And it's interesting what y'all pointed out in the segment before. You think about most of the elite quarterbacks, how much continuity is there? I mean, Patrick Mahomes, you mentioned Andy Reid. That's great. Whenever you can get a head coach like him or Kyle Shanahan and they stick around, Mike McDaniel maybe with the Dolphins and Tua, how you get to have that continuity at the head coach level. You're going to have a lot of turnover sometimes. Lamar Jackson, he had Greg Roman for several years, but they switched to Todd Monken, and he was a lot more. I think I compare what Monken did with Lamar Jackson was a lot like what I think Brian Johnson was trying to do with Jalen Hurts last year in terms of giving him a lot more options, running through a checklist before the snap. It's going to be that. That's one of the major things, and Jalen talked a little bit about that yesterday, was how much of that pre-snap check is his responsibility. Will it be Cam Jurgens' responsibility? Where are they building that? That's going to be one of the major things Moore's doing. So to have seen him have this sustainable success throughout his career through many play callers, I think it's fair to say that this is, you just want to see whether that potential can continue with the guy. And I think there's a lot of confidence that there can be. And I think he's proven that through both college and the NFL. And that's actually a pretty good asset to have if like y'all said earlier, you're kind of bound to have turnover if you have a head coach like Nick Sirianni, who's more in a managerial role. And if you're too good and Shane Steichen leaves, you got to replace. And then if they're bad, and like last year, then you got to move on. So maybe kind of a perfect situation whenever you have a managerial coach and a quarterback who's more of a sponge mode type guy.
Yeah, if you want continuity, Brooks, it's almost you have to have an offensive play caller as the head coach, because look where we are with the Eagles. I mean, the expectations are so high, let's be honest. It ends one of two ways here, and that's either the head coach gets fired because of the lack of expectations. Then there's going to be turnover from that perspective. Who knows? Who could be Kellen Moore? Doubtful, because if you're a failure, it's doubtful you're going to elevate the offensive coordinator. I suppose that's not impossible, but it's doubtful. And if the Eagles are tremendously successful, Kellen Moore is probably going to be a head coach if he turns Jalen Hurts back into what he was in 22 as a runner-up for MVP, and Nick Sirianni stays here. So that's just the nature of the modern NFL, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think is interesting about the way they're set up on the offensive end right now is that whenever Shane Steichen was, whenever he moved on to the Colts, there was kind of a pecking order somewhere where they could promote from within, and Brian Johnson moved up from there. If Kellen Moore, let's say, after a year or two, gets a head coaching job, would they promote from within? Who would that be? I mean, is that someone where Patullo gets his chance as an offensive coordinator? I mean, Doug Nussmeier has followed Moore a lot. I mean, is he someone that would be an offensive coordinator type? I think it was more clear when you had like an up-and-comer like Brian Johnson who had been a play caller in college and he could move through the ranks. Or is this a situation where Sirianni has learned that, hey, it's good to have a full coaching staff, and loyalty is obviously very important to him. But is it a situation where when you have a vacancy, sometimes it might be more important to have outside ideas continually coming through the program? So I think whenever you have head coaches, even who are play callers like Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan, maybe there's a value as time goes on to have, as Nick Sirianni learned last year, fresh ideas every year to maybe have an idea overall of what you want to do as an offense. But in the ever-changing, it might be nice to have someone come in and give their a different perspective based on what they've learned around the NFL. So the managerial role as a head coach is so interesting to me because it's so unpredictable.
Yeah.
In the next couple
that real quick as a follow-up to that, because I think it's interesting. Wasn't going to go down this route, but I think it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Whether you think Nick's wings were clipped or he learned versus being a political animal and understood from the prospect of reading the room correctly and saying Jeffrey Lurie wanted some changes and wanted some fresh ideas. I know you can't know, but your perception of, was it true evolution or political, I'm going to save my skin?
Well, John, it's interesting. I think I've been thinking about this a lot as someone who is still learning about this franchise. I mean, I've been here 6-7 months, so I can't say that I know the full up to bottom, top to bottom thinking of an entire organization. But from, meeting with Jeffrey Lurie and hearing him at the annual meetings and just getting a sense of where things are, I think what they value as an organization, and hearing Howie Roseman talk about this the other day, they've sustained over the last 24 years a team that hasn't had the bottom fall out. And how do you do that? I mean, they really value how Howie Roseman builds the roster up, but they keep talking about culture, how they value, and you think about, this is kind of the era of Eagles lifers, Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey, and Lane Johnson's probably going to play his whole career here too, Brandon Graham, other players like that, and how they continually build an environment where these players come in and they can extend them and continue to play. I say all that because I think what they value, what Jeffrey Lurie values in Nick Sirianni, is that with what they build out of that with the roster, his presence as a leader, as someone who builds out the year, how it works, how the team functions. I think they see a lot of the leadership qualities in Sirianni. Jeffrey Lurie sees that in him, and he values that a lot more than play calling. He said that himself. He said that play calling is never a reason he hired a head coach. Yeah. And
by the way, it's so overrated. I agree with you.
So too, but it is interesting because it's volatile. So you have to it sure as hell helps if the guy can make play calls. I mean, Andy Reid ended up being a great play caller.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't there a time too when Doug was the play caller and people were saying, he had too much on his plate because he was calling the plays, and then you're not paying attention.
Working, everybody's going to criticize it, right?
Well, and that's what Brooks. What I say is, people don't judge play calling; they judge play results. But they think they're judging play calling. And I had this discussion with Doug. Doug would say, "You know what?" And he was very honest about it. Sometimes the players save my ass, and they make something out of nothing. On the other hand, sometimes you dial up the perfect play and the left guard gets beat and nobody knows. You got him. Oh, you got him, but somebody didn't execute. From that perspective, everybody's judging play results, but they don't realize it. They're judging and they think, oh, that's a bad play call.
Well,
might be a great play call.
Yeah, and when those results are bad, I mean, they're going to want to fix them. So what is it that happened, right? So you have a managerial head coach who is responsible for what's out on the field, and his offense that he is putting out there and having Brian Johnson. He said it several times that he's running my offense. This is kind of what we want to do, and he's calling plays within that confines. Jeffrey Lurie likes Nick Sirianni in his managerial role. So if you're going to change the offense, Brian Johnson gets caught in the middle. He has to be the one that gets removed, and then they have to bring in someone else. Sirianni, whenever they announced that, and the first time we talked to him, he was distraught. He looked very sullen on the stage. Like, he's not someone that likes to fire people, and he's caught in a really awkward, I don't know if that's the right word, but a scenario where you have to cut loose a guy. It's a strange scenario where a guy's getting head coaching offers and you're having to fire in the middle of those. I mean, not offers, interviews.
Yeah.
So like that's how I perceived is Jeffrey Lurie likes his managerial. They had to make changes on the offensive side, and whenever you have that, you have to make some changes that may not be popular. So I covered another managerial head coach, Ed Orgeron at LSU. Never really was a coordinator. He came in, was an excellent defensive line technician. And then when all things come together and you get an offensive coordinator like Joe Brady, he was a passing game coordinator at the time, and you have an excellent defensive coordinator, Dave Aranda, who ends up being a head coach of his own, you have to continually be able to hire within those slots. And you also have to manage the culture of the entire organization. So in 2019, when they win the national championship, and then later on, you just see how a whole culture falls apart. So Sirianni is in this situation here where he's got to keep the thing going. So he's made 2 staff changes, and they have great continuity on the roster. They've just, the Athletic, we just did an analysis of the rosters as they stand going into the draft, and the Eagles ranked number 5 in the NFL. Yeah. There's a good roster on there. Sirianni, who's overseeing all of it, has to make sure that that whoever's calling the plays and whatever the offensive system is, that they're maximizing out of that. You've got Hurts, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, Dallas Goedert. There's no reason why that shouldn't be a top 5 offense. You should not have a 1-6 finish. So all of that follows on him. But Lurie overall, as I see it, likes to see how an overall culture that they built. Right. He places that a lot in Sirianni. So I don't think it was a political save my skin, and this is a political situation where I'm just making him the fall guy to save my job. I think that Lurie actually values him as a manager. And after going to the Super Bowl in his second year and going to the playoffs 3 straight years, he wants to give him the opportunity to continue what has been largely a success in his tenure. So if you fire him, then you're also sending a message to other coaches who are interviewing, well, how long is my leash going to be? Do I get the chance to fix problems after 1 year of it going wrong? So I think all of it had a little nuance, just specific to how the Eagles run as an organization.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things, Brooks, with Sirianni, that they would know behind closed doors more than us 3 having this conversation and everybody watching, is what role Sirianni had in the success of the team, getting to a Super Bowl. What did he bring? What quality did he have that they value to say, that's part of the reason why we made it to a Super Bowl and been to 3 straight. Yeah, we had a little falling off here, but we value the positives more than that little small sample size.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't here at the time, obviously, but, he comes in, and the staff that he builds, he brings Shane Steichen with him, Jonathan Gannon with him, all the ideas and the things that they put together, and the back and forth of building an entire system around players that end up going to the Super Bowl. I mean, they like what he built. They think that he continue to do that. And after they leave, they want to give him a chance to continue that. So tried to do that with Brian Johnson. It worked for a large majority of the season, and then just the bottom fell out in a very confusing finish. So
We're all still trying to figure out what happened.
It's apparent that, like, obviously they've got figured out on offense, but Jeffrey Lurie obviously believes that it's a tweak and not a complete overhaul, that they bring in somebody like Kellen Moore who can infuse a little bit more ideas into an offense to keep it sustainable throughout an entire season. So that's what I think they like about that. I think that's what Lurie likes about Sirianni from what he did before and what he did well in that beginning.
So one thing, on the radio show yesterday we were talking about, which is how does this staff moving forward, we talk about being a sponge and new coordinator, how do they view Jalen Hurts? Do they view him as a guy that they want to be a passer, limit his running, only run when you have to? 2 years ago, he played less games but ran more, had more yards than he had last year. Now, last year there was questions, was he injured and that why he wasn't running as much, or because of the contract? Do they not want him to run? Do they value him as a passer? Where does this franchise, paying this man what they're paying him, how do they view him big picture?
Well, they view him as their franchise quarterback. That's clear. They view him as someone who can is an excellent passer. I think last year when you see how they did run a lot of what they called run pass options, sometimes I think there were reads that just ended up being passes more frequently than runs. You think about how a defense takes things away from an offense. Hurts is an exceptional runner as a quarterback, and I think there are times whenever it just benefited them more to take that away in certain instances. But I think they see him as an all-around quarterback, and if you think about how Moore is going to use him as a quarterback, think of it last year. Justin Herbert, he's not, I wouldn't say a complete rushing quarterback, but he still had over 200 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. I think they're going to use that from Jalen Hurts, but you also have to think about what they're building around him. You've got 2 of the best receivers in the NFL, arguably a top 5 running back in the NFL. And if they're looking to use some of these zone reads or things like that, how much is Kellen Moore going to use in that? I think they see a top 5 quarterback in Jalen Hurts, and that gives you a lot of options based on what you have throughout the talent on your team. So that's someone that you can build around. I think it doesn't mean you could make tons of decisions in that way. You could say, all right, well, we want him to rush for 500 plus yards this year. Well, he's thrown for over 3,500 yards every year. They're confident in him as a passer. You can build around that too. So any of these franchise quarterbacks that a team has is someone that, and again, in sponge mode, that you can bring in an offensive coordinator and they can, whenever they're starting to be creative on the board and say, how do I use this guy? That there's a lot of options. So I'm actually really curious to see how Moore, based on his past years, what he sees in Jalen and what he thinks his strengths and what he can use and what might still be a strength for Jalen, but in Moore's system, the way he views offenses may not be used as much. I don't think that means that Jalen Hurts, if that thing is less, that means that Jalen's bad at that. I think it's more because of how Moore thinks would be valuable.
And there's a lot of pressure on Kellen Moore because, as you mentioned, there's tremendous talent on this offense, and there's no reason they shouldn't be a top 5 offense.
Well, that's what I think a lot of, the fans look at and say, you got all this talent. If you had, because there's always these.
And you got to keep everybody happy. Well, easy way to do that, though, is to win football games, and then everybody's happy. But we saw last year, Brooks, and this is where, you're the fresh ideas on the beat. Sometimes we all get jaded. Like, I want to talk to you about Howie and Howie's press conference, because I take everything Howie says about the draft with a grain of salt. I want to see things through your eyes and see if you culled anything from that. But so that part of it I want to get from you, but also to finish up on Kellen Moore, the fact that he has to keep everybody happy and Saquon's added to the mix. We all look, nobody was complaining when they were 10-1 last year, but when things came off, not that I think AJ gets a bad rap because a lot of his a lot of his angst has to do with the team not performing well, and he just takes being a team captain seriously and is trying to get people on the same page and get people productive. But bottom line is, guys will start complaining about touches if you don't win football games. So it's a good problem, as Nick Sirianni always says, but the word problem still exists in good problem.
Yeah, I mean, I agree in terms of how players operate within a team that's either successful or not successful. I mean, everybody who gets to the NFL, there's something about them individually within their mentality, within their physicality that has gotten to this point. Like, elite athletes are just different humans. And if you end up winning, it solves a lot of problems. But if you lose, everyone who's a competitive person is going to sit there and think, oh, either they're super self-critical about what they did on the field and feel like they should have done something better, or they felt like they didn't get the opportunity to change the game. I mean, it's just the first thing that popped in my head, but think about the Super Bowl when Travis Kelce gets off on the sideline and bumps Andy Reid out of anger.
Yeah.
Like, those two have one of the best relationships between players and coaches in the NFL. But like, that I think that when you compare to how the AJ Brown narrative was going around last season, I think that's the manifestation of what people feel whenever they're losing, whenever they're not feeling like they're contributing, whenever it's not going well. So, I mean, there are instances in the past where that's brewed into a problem. And I think that's one of the large reasons why there's criticism, and fair criticism, about the state of the team going to this year under Sirianni, who's a manager, and part of your manager as a coach is to make sure that there's not a problem with people. And whenever there's, 1-6 finish, everybody's going to be pissed. I remember talking to Jason Kelce in the locker room after the 49ers lost, and he said, one loss isn't a problem. The problem happens whenever there's many in succession and you lose faith in the coaching and in yourself. That's exactly what happened towards the end of the season. So nothing's going to look right. So back to your original thing that you said earlier, I want to touch on it again. Kellen Moore, this is his third offensive coordinator job in the NFL. Cowboys, Chargers, Eagles. Guy who's had head coaching interviews before. This is the best opportunity you could possibly have. I mean, the Chargers,
true.
But like, there was some problems with holes on the offense and things like that. There's a lot of pressure on Moore, and anybody looking at this situation, and I got a sense of this last year whenever I saw the entire Link chant "Run the ball." If you have all these options and it's not working, and you've tried too hard on one thing, it's not going to look good for Moore. And if they're not a top 5 offensive again, you're just going to be looking at it and wondering why. So it's a great opportunity for him, but maybe there's you're damned both ways if it weren't done. So
well, the off season is always a fun time to break out the lists and the debates. And one of the things I think before last year, you would say Jalen Hurts is he's top 5 guy. We had a topic the other day. Somebody asked me, would I take Jordan Love over Jalen Hurts, or would I take, this guy? And you're starting to think, how far has Hurts slid down the list? In other words, hey, if Jordan Love played with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith and Goddard and this offensive line, would we be having these strange conversations about what the hell happened to the offense? Is it a byproduct of that position, or is that not fair?
I think there's some recency bias always in evaluation of players after every year. The thing that I think gets unnoticed a little bit last year is that Jalen Hurts threw for a career high in both yards and touchdowns.
Yeah.
But conversely, threw 15 picks and lost a bunch of fumbles. So the volatility of the dissonance on offense showed a lot of the confusion that was going on the field, and that's always going to be coming through on the quarterback. So you have some of these elite moments, like the Chiefs game where Jalen Hurts checks to Devonta Smith play that breaks the game open, or coming back against the Bills and has the rushing touchdown to win the game. And then you have throwing a pick against the Seahawks late in the game, looking confused, and in the Tampa Bay wild card game, wherever Goddard and I think it was Devontae Smith ran the same route along the sideline, and
the jet interception.
So those things, it looks like Hurts isn't a top 5 quarterback. If like to answer the premise of your question, but like I think that shows an overall issue with how the offense is functioning, and not so much with the quarterback, because as we're talking about the kind of quarterback Jalen Hurts is a sponge type guy. He's going to reflect a bit of what the offense, and if it doesn't have fluidity and sensible fluidity, it's going to show that on the field. And I think even with the problems that it had systemically, 3,800 yards, 23 touchdowns, 15 picks, that's with all the problems that they had on the back end of the year. You had 2 receivers making 1,000 yards. That's pretty good for a team that everybody felt like, coaches should be.
Number 8 offense in the NFL, tremendous third down offense, tremendous fourth down offense, top 10 red zone offense.
So I'll say, like, if Kellen Moore gets the most out of this offense, this is the moment where Hurts would make it clear that he's worth $255 million. I mean, there's no one on the team and in the coaching, and we heard Jeffrey Lurie say it himself, that feels like Jalen Hurts isn't an amazing quarterback.
Well, let's ask the question like this. Okay, so and I thought the Eagles were in a really tough spot. Okay, the year before, he's an average quarterback, kind of middle to the back end of the pack. They make the playoffs. They bring him, he's the starter next year after all the talk. Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson. Nope, he's the guy. He takes him to the Super Bowl. He's so good that they have to pay him. They have to decide, are we paying you on this one great year or the year before? You're not getting somewhere in the middle. That's not the way this works. But what if we had all 3 years to evaluate? What kind of deal is he getting?
Well, I think you have to look at it in terms of how the Eagles operate. We heard Roseman talk about it the other day. It's been a topic of such that I've written about the last couple of weeks in terms of free agency, like Devontae Smith getting his extension. They didn't even pick up his 5th-year option yet. They did it like, all right, we're going to add the 5th, and then we're going to add 3 years.
Which, by the way, is an amazing contract. He doesn't get $25 million, Brooks, till 2026. And by that point, Jefferson signed, Chase is signed, Ayuk signed, Lamb signed, and that's going to look cheap as hell in 2026.
When Jalen Hurts got his contract, he was temporarily the highest paid
for about 10 seconds, I think.
And then everybody else went after that. So that's how the Eagles operate. You say, okay, we need a quarterback. That's the number 1 position in all the NFL. And taking the sample size the last couple of years, we know that we need this position. And the way that we operate is that we get ahead on this. And if we decide that we like the guy, then we're going to give him a contract to the market of that present time and lock him up for a long period of time. They did that. And there's still, you see other teams that are stuck in high-paid situations.
Look at Denver and Minnesota this year. They have pigeonholed themselves. Yeah, Deshaun Watson, from being down with the Texans. People pigeonhole themselves into making these drastic decisions at quarterback. I think the Eagles are fine there, but I
don't have a problem with the contract for Jalen Hurts, because
not at
good
all
enough to get you and win a Super Bowl. Like
I maintain it's team friendly. That's what the Eagles do. That's been one of the successes at B Cabina. Though I want to get, because we only got a few minutes left with you. Athletic.com does a tremendous job. I mentioned those fresh ideas. I need your fresh ideas from Howie's press conference, because of the draft. We're a week away, and we got in that wormhole, which was great discussion. But I want to get your thoughts on the draft at 22 overall.
Yeah,
very unlikely Howie stays there. That's been his history. Might go up, the targeted trade up. But the debates. You need a right guard potentially, but you probably want a right guard you can kick out to tackle whenever Lane decides to walk away, versus maybe cornerback or anybody else. Where's Brooks Cabina got the Eagles going?
I'll go to what he said the other day, which I thought was kind of funny. He just said, I like the trades. The last 3 years, he's had, I think, 13 draft day trades in the last 3 years. So to think that they won't move in the first round is kind of unlikely to me. But there's another scenario that, okay, so you have all these quarterbacks and receivers who are going to clog the top 10, and it's going to push out all these offensive tackles into the mid rounds. My argument is, if you feel like there's value in getting one of these elite offensive tackles that might have gone top 10 in any other given year, it might be worth packaging one of your second round picks to move up and select one of them. Because
I agree.
If you stay at 22, you're probably going to get one of the 6 or 7. And I've seen everyone across the beat and reputable people across the nation, like it kind of fluctuates between Amarius Mims from Georgia or Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma. And if you're sitting in that situation, you're not getting much flexibility at playing at guard.
No.
Mims never played it. He's 6'8", not a great frame to put in the inside.
He's got very little experience, period.
Well, even at tackle, you have questions whether you can plug and play. I think everybody brings up the Stoutland University thing and think that's just going to wash everything. Oh, you can apply that to any offensive lineman they pick. He's going to get the most out of them as a developmental guy. So you could use that argument for anybody.
Yeah.
So, but listening to what Howie said the other day, and I've only covered 2 general managers, Nick Caserio with the Texans and now Howie Roseman.
It was very good. You've had 2 very good general managers.
They both have holistic processes. They know what they're doing, obviously. And I think whenever you listen to them talk before draft day, no general manager is going to give away what they're doing, but they both give you a sense of what they value and how they operate within their process. I think one of the best answers, and I wrote about it immediately after, is how we talked to Jimmy Kempski, asked him about offensive tackle, basically, with Lane Johnson and whether he retires. Do you draft a guy? Does he wait? I thought Howie's answer was really interesting because he talked about the value of the whole team and being able to use some of the veterans like Jason Kelsey and Fletcher Cox and others to show them how to play. And you can use that within drafting a guy, and they're very much we're going to pick the best player, not force a position. So like describing his process, that you could say, all right, well, he said that in answer to offensive tackle. That means that they're fine with taking Amarius Mims. Well, you could also use that same theory, that same idea for a bevy of other picks. If they pick a wide receiver, you've got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, 2 guys playing on extensions. You could use that at, cornerback. You have Darius Slay, who's an all-pro that people can learn from. I think that can be involved with whatever they decide to do with number 22 overall. Whenever you sit there and listen to a general manager before the draft, none of what they talk about in a specific player matters. What matters is what they say about their process that will eventually explain how they're thinking about what they'll do with those picks. So whatever they decide to do, whether it's trade up to get some of these offensive linemen, whether it's to trade back because they feel like there's more value in acquiring more picks for the later because they feel like the middle of the pack, just a different evaluation piece is better there. I think, it'll explain their philosophy. But back to like what I've kind of looked at in terms of 22, just go back to the offensive lineman thing. The question here is, what do they value more? Do they value more the pick that it would require to move up to pick a guy that has more flexibility, interior and outside? You'd probably have to move up as far as 16. Is that value higher than what they'd value in picking an offensive tackle at 22, like Mims, who eventually have to be developed and play?
Right.
We don't know what those values are on their chart. So, like, there could be no trades between the middle teams because, Dane Brugler, one of our draft analysts at The Athletic, supremely good at his job.
Tremendous. The Beast. We'll give it a plug.
Looked at
best draft guide in the business.
His 7-round draft mock draft came out, and he only had 4 trades in the first round, and none of them had to do with positions other than quarterback and wide receiver. I think that there's also a debate because it takes 2 to telephone how we may want to move up, but maybe a lot of teams will sit there and say, you know what, on my big board, all these offensive tackles are freaking good.
Yeah.
So like, if I miss out on this guy, I'll just take the next guy. I'll be fine with whoever falls to me. And the Eagles may be sitting there and they're like, ah, crap. Well, we just get the 5th guy.
Yeah. I always point out it takes 2 to tango. I mean, just because you want to trade up or trade down doesn't mean you can at all times, but Howie's been very good at it.
Let's just hope the guy on the other line isn't Kevin Costner. What was his name in that movie?
I don't know, but the Jacksonville GM was the loser. I do remember that. So I
want my picks back. All of them.
Not Trent Baalke, but I forget his name. But that draft day, that Jacksonville draft day GM, man, guys, watch that movie. He does a bad job. Bad job, bro.
Never seen it. One of my friends in the business, Nick Underhill, covers the Saints. Every year he tweets out around this time, like him watching the movie, and it's like, this is so terrible.
It is.
So I've yet to see it, and I
get to look at Jennifer Gardner at Radio Row, a Super Bowl in New York, MetLife Stadium. Jennifer Gardner on Radio Row.
She was in the elevator with us. Were you in the elevator with us, John, when she was in there?
I was not. I did get. I was in the media center, and Mr. Costner had to use the bathroom. They had a very small bathroom.
Sonny Weaver, by the way, was his name.
Sonny Weaver was the bad
Junior.
And there's like these big burly security guards, Brooks, blocking the entrance to the bathroom. Mr. Costner is in the bathroom. I got that.
I remember that.
Yeah.
All right.
You can't share the same stall.
Brooks Kabina from The Athletic. Their coverage outstanding, getting you ready for the draft. Read his article about Jalen Hurts sponging it all in as he's getting ready for an offseason for his 3rd offensive coordinator in Philadelphia. And that all starts now as the draft 1 week from today. Brooks, it's good to see you, man.
Likewise, guys.
Thanks, bud.
All right, Brooks Kabina here on Birds 365, and we'll wrap it all up coming up next.
Imagine for a moment that you went to work today and when you came home, you were catastrophically injured. Your life and your family's life. That's what happened to union construction worker Mike Little.
I was scared of what the end was going to be, but to be 100% honest with you, I knew I was going to be all right just by talking with Brian. In my heart, I just knew everything was going to be all right.
Call the firm and find out why they say, "We got this." Call 215-458-2222.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Underdog Fantasy is the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and certainly the easiest when you're watching the NBA. And the NBA playoffs are almost here, and you can win money making picks. What are you waiting for? Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com and use the promo code WIN. An Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. That's UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN. Get ready for the NBA and get ready for the NBA playoffs. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN.
Hi everybody, my name's Jason Lombardi. I'm an inspector at DryTech. At DryTech we offer 3 major services, the first one being basement waterproofing. The second service we offer is foundation and structural repairs. And then the third service that we offer is mold remediation. If you feel you are having a waterproofing issue, give DryTech a call or check us out online.
Do you Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News?
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
EAGLES, Eagles.
All right, getting ready to wrap up a Thursday. 1 week to the draft. That means we will have certainly much more draft conversation between now and then. And one question we would have for the draft, I guess, John, before we get out of here today on Birds 365, is how likely is it that they trade a pick and get an actual established player? Is that something that's even entered the mind?
Oh, it's entered my mind.
All right.
I mean, I think the day one trade acquisition of A.J. Brown couple of years ago, that put the Eagles over the top and turned them into a Super Bowl team. And I think, if you look at year one, Mike, loss in Tampa Bay in the playoffs, year three, loss in Tampa Bay in the playoffs, both kind of ugly from an offensive perspective. What do those two things have in common? No A.J. Brown on the field. They had some good players, but when they don't have A.J. Brown on the field, they're not the same team. So you can get a player like that.
Yep.
I trade the 22nd pick for that. I think that's so. Patrick Surtain would be the most obvious name. I've said from pretty consistently, I don't know why Denver would trade Patrick Surtain to anybody other than to get a quarterback, and the Eagles probably can't help them with that. So I don't know if it's a fit, but you get a player like that, you're not getting that player at 22. I'll say that.
All right. Well, I don't know what my schedule will look like next week, if I'll be here or not, but I had some fun filling in here on Birds 365. It's good to catch up with you again, John. 2 hours is very quick in this world. Holy mackerel. A lot easier than the 4 hours I'm about to do later on today. But if I'm here next week, I'll tell you my pick. And if not, remember that I said Cooper DeJean is the pick at 22 1 week from today.
I'll remember.
Remember
Either way,
that.
I'll remember.
All right. For John, I'm Mike. This has been Birds 365. Have a great Thursday, everybody.
You've been listening to Birds 365, the destination for the passionate Eagles football fan who bleeds green. If it's Eagles football, we're talking about it. Debate inside the locker room and guests that are some of the greatest football minds from around the region. We hope you enjoyed the show. We know we had a blast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on social media at JAKIB Sports. See you next time on Birds 365.